Hi, I'm Max Keiser, and this is the Keiser Report. American embarrassment Bill O'Reilly of Fox News is getting some attention on international TV.
Now, RT came under attack from Fox News talk show host Bill O'Reilly last week. He lashed out at an interview with former radical anti-war activist, now Professor Bill Ayers, who was speaking to RT's Anastasia Churkina. She now puts American mainstream television in the spotlight to see if it's spinning too far from the truth.
Yes, spinning too far from the truth. Now, as an American myself, let me explain Bill O'Reilly to those living outside of the U.S. who might not be familiar with his work. He's what we call a news coprophagist. Now, a coprophagist is a person with a fetishistic attraction to feces and or eating feces. This might be a new word for some of you out there, so we go to dictionary.com to get a pronunciation of coprophagist. Here we go.
Coprophagist.
Yes, coprophagist. Bill O'Reilly, news coprophagist.
Coprophagist.
Okay, now let's have an example of Bill O'Reilly's news coprophagy, shall we? He's one of these climate deniers who thinks that corporate propaganda in the U.S. denying climate change, the defecation essentially from corporate America, is something that he willingly gobbles down per this clip.
The Obama administration believes that climate change is a frontline issue, that global warming must be addressed immediately. Now, that pleases organizations like Greenpeace, who are now saying the wildfires in California are spreading quicker because of climate change.
This is typical of Bill coprophagistically swallowing the corporate line in the U.S. that climate change is nothing to worry about. I'm sure that people have had their homes burnt down in California. Happy to hear that Bill is in league with the climate deniers. And, of course, he's not somebody who is consistent with his views. To underline the fact that O'Reilly's essentially insane, aside from being also a coprophagist, here's another clip of Bill denying his own denial.
Any other things that might...
Environment. Government's got to be proactive on environment. Global warming is here. All these idiots will run around and say it isn't here. That's ridiculous.
All right. Enough of Bill. So, in other words, Fox News, Murdoch, O'Reilly, crazy. Propaganda, corporate sludge. Let's get on with the rest of the big stories for this week. We bring on political analyst Stacy Herbert. Stacy, hit me with this week's news.
Max, we have neo-feudalism in the news. This is the American economy, and you see this in the headline that what you're really seeing are the people suffering in America compared to those who are living large are those without access to government. They're living badly. Those with access to government are living in this very corrupt, they're getting lots of money from the government, from the taxpayer. So the first one, here's the headlines for the people outside the moat. For America's Santas, it's hard to be jolly with the tales they are hearing. So last week, during Christmas season, we had Santa Clauses in the malls around America, and they were talking about these horrific stories of children sitting on their lap asking for their Christmas gifts. And they were in dire straits, basically. They were asking for things like socks and, a pair of shoes. It was like Great Depression sort of requests they had.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, Santa can't fulfill everyone's little dream, can they?
Apparently not. So the next headline.
Socks? Socks? Socks for kids? What do they expect? What do they expect? Next thing you know, they'll be expecting to have actual, sustenance. They're serfs working out in the neo-feudal plantations. Get a grip, kids.
The next headline goes along with this, the same sort of people apparently attending this parish church in the UK. It's okay to shoplift, says Father Tim Jones, parish priest of St. Lawrence and St. Hilda. So this was just before Christmas. And this parish priest, Tim Jones, told his congregation, quote, "My advice as a Christian priest is to shoplift. I do not offer such advice because I think that stealing is a good thing or because I think it is harmless, for it is neither. I would ask that you do not steal from small family businesses, but from large national businesses, knowing that the costs are ultimately passed on to the rest of us in the form of higher prices.
Well, that's family values for you. In the U.S., you know, the conservatives in particular preach the whole family values. So stealing from large corporations, as espoused by the clergyman there, is consistent with the overall Republican/Wall Street mentality of steal from everybody for the greater good of a few. I think this is pretty much the guy. He's probably, remember, Lord Blankfein said he was doing God's work. And this is a man of the cloth saying that to do God's work, you must steal. Thou shalt steal. So therefore, Goldman Sachs and this clergyman obviously putting forward the notion that to steal is doing God's work. This is how Lloyd Blankfein and Goldman Sachs came up with this notion that stealing is virtuous.
It could have been where he got his idea from, but it's also perhaps like the Santa Clauses in the malls of America hearing desperate tales from little kids. This could be, this priest might have been hearing desperate tales in the confession booth. But then let's go outside the moat to the Lloyd Blankfeins of the world.
Oh, yes, yes.
The headline reads, "Banks with political ties got bailouts, study shows."
Oh, right. Their Santa Claus lives in a parallel North Pole, somewhere unknown by the children of America.
That's correct. U.S. banks that spent more money on lobbying were more likely to get government bailout money, according to a report from the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. So banks with executives who sat on the board of the Federal Reserve Bank were 31% more likely to get access to TARP, Capital Purchase Program money. And banks with ties to Finance Committee members were 26% more likely to get Capital Purchase Program funds.
Well, it's called bribes and corruption, I think is the ordinary term for it, but neo-feudalism will do.
It's certainly not capitalism, because look at this next statement I'm going to make. Political influence was most helpful for poorly performing banks. So in capitalism, of course, you're supposed to let the bad companies go bust. And
right.
It clears away. It's creative destruction. It gets rid of the bad companies and makes the rest of the system stronger. But in fact, those with the poorly performing banks were more likely to get bailout funds if they had political access.
Well, that's the new standard in America. If a bank like Goldman Sachs can't make it, they lower the bar. Yeah, they lower the bar. Keep lowering the bar. If they can't pass health care, lower the bar. If they can't pass any kind of legislation to prevent global climate holocaust, lower the bar. Please keep lowering the bar. China is waiting on the sideline to eat your lunch.
And then the next headline, Treasury removes cap for Fannie and Freddie aid.
Oh, my God. Oh, is that true?
Yes.
Oh, my God. No, tell me it's not true. Peter Schiff is rolling around, puking up his guts right now. Where's Peter Schiff?
And this was done on Christmas Eve after the bond markets had closed and all the markets had closed. The Treasury Department announced that with an executive order that they were going to remove the $400 billion financial cap on the money that went to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Mm-hmm. So the Treasury Department officials said they will now use a flexible formula to ensure the two agencies can stand behind the billions of dollars in mortgage-backed securities they sell to investors. Under the formula, listen to this, Max, financial support would increase according to how much each firm loses in a quarter.
Yeah. That reminds me of the dot-com days. Remember, I told you my dot-com, because we were losing $1 million a month, Bear Stearns said it was worth $200 million in an IPO. So this mentality of the more you lose, the more you're worth is continuing through Enron, WorldCom, the real estate crisis. The Federal Reserve is a huge Ponzi scheme. The Federal Reserve is a huge hedge fund run by out-of-control psychopaths on Wall Street, including Lord Blankfein, Jamie Dimon, the whole Wall Street cloud, Royal Bank of Scotland, Barclays Bank. They're all psychopaths. They're all hedge fund managers. They treat the global economy like a personal slush fund and hedge fund, and they're driving the thing into the ground. And you've now got neo-feudalism, where most of the world's population lives on $1 a day, or in America, soon to be $5,000 a year or less, as wage conflation means that the U.S. average worker continues to wake up poorer and poorer because nobody's willing to stand up to the feudalism reasserting itself. Remember, we did a revolution in America to get away from feudal lords. Now they brought it back.
That's
Obama.
Well, many analysts are expecting that it's quite possible we may see some horrendous numbers from the fourth quarter in trying to explain why the Treasury has basically given unlimited support now to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Well, you know, Santa Claus, meanwhile, has got to tell the kids at the mall that they have no food to eat, no socks to wear, but Wall Street gets unlimited multi-billion-dollar open spigot bailouts for no reason other than they're greedy punks.
And finally, on the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac story, the CEOs of Fannie and Freddie could get as much as $6 million for their Christmas bonus.
Well, Blackwater, Fannie Mae, they're mercenaries. These are financial mercenaries. You know, that's why they sent all these people into Iraq and Afghanistan, these soldiers, so-called, is to take care of the inflation problem. Because the more of those that get wiped out, the less inflation is going to seep into the system. So as part of the economic welfare that we've got, the mercenary system, Blackwater and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they just blow hundreds of billions of dollars on weapons and bad bailout loans as a way to mop up all the money that the Fed's created to pay the guys on Wall Street their huge bonuses. What a system.
One final headline on the people inside the moat and those outside the moat. London exodus to Geneva runs into housing school shortages. So Geneva, touted as a haven for London bankers who are saying, we're going to flee London because we don't want to pay this new bonus tax of 50%. Right. So apparently it's not so much better in Geneva. In fact, there's a 44% income tax rate and there's a shortage of homes. So it looks like they're going to have to stay in London or go to maybe Liberia or Cayman Islands, another tax haven, which was bailed out by the UK taxpayer recently.
Yeah, Switzerland is just not the place to go anymore with your ill-gotten gains. I mean, it was great during the Nazi period, but no more. Now they've clamped down on that stuff. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Stacy Herbert, political analyst for the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
After the break, I'll be talking with economist Ravi Batra. So stay tuned.
Welcome to the future.
This month, technology update out for blood.
Well, actually, that freaks me out. Can we not do that?
Sniffing out the perfect mate, it's all in the genes. A cure for cancer, just speed up the clock. And genetically modified mouse milk, anyone?
And the benefits are absolutely huge.
Join us at the cutting edge of medicine this month on Technology Update.
Here on RT, we've got the future covered.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. And now, a special treat. Best-selling author Ravi Batra, economist extraordinaire. Ravi, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Thanks a lot.
Now, Ravi, in your 1999 book, The Crash of the Millennium, you predicted that the trend toward higher wage gaps would lead to an economic depression. Exactly what we've been seeing. This trend toward ever greater wealth and income gaps certainly accelerated under the Bush administration. Is this what caused the financial crisis?
That's right. That huge jump in productivity but stagnant wages created a lot of income disparity, a lot of wealth disparity at the same time. All that led to the financial crisis, the housing meltdown, and now a very severe jump in unemployment. Yes, all that is the result of very high wealth disparity, which in turn is the result of the rising wage gap.
Okay, so it's pretty simple that the crisis in the economy is caused in large part because of the wage and income gap. And yet, you don't hear people talking about in the U.S. It seems as though the idea of equality is such a mythological concept in America that the idea that there's incredible inequality doesn't even make it into the mainstream press. How do they maintain this illusion?
My analysis is very simple. Productivity is the main source of supply, wages are the main source of demand. How do we know that? Well, it's very simple to see that wages are the main source of demand, but productivity is the main source of supply, because when people become more productive, output goes up. So there has to be a supply-demand balance over time, otherwise the economy falls apart. And ever since about 1980, in the United States, productivity has been rising sharply, but wages have not. Wages have remained stagnant because of a variety of policies, government policies. So the result was that supply kept rising and demand lagged behind. So to fill this gap, this supply-demand gap, what the government did was to create a lot more debt. The government borrowed a lot of money. They made the consumers borrow a lot of money by constantly reducing interest rates. And this way the supply-demand gap was filled, but it just postponed the problem to the future. And since productivity rises every year, that means debt had to rise year after year. And by 2006 or 7, the credit system was so overloaded. The banks had loaned out so much money to keep the system going that it had to explode.
Okay, hold on a second, Ravi. Let's just to be clear. The productivity number in America that's quoted, when they say that productivity is going higher, wages are not going higher. It's just an indication that the debt levels are going higher, and this is increasing the wealth and income gap and the wage gap. And so the productivity number, just like GDP and unemployment, is just yet another government statistic that's quoted in the paper, in the mainstream media, that gives a completely false impression of the true underlying economics. Fair statement?
That's right. That's exactly what I say, and that's exactly what you can see from what has happened all over the world, and especially in the United States. Now, since productivity rises year after year, and if wages don't rise, that means debt has to rise year after year, and a time comes the debt burden is so great that the credit system simply explodes.
Okay, so currently the unemployment numbers seem to be creeping higher, even though there's so-called recovery is out there in the form of higher stock prices. So let me ask you this. Is the worst of this crisis behind us? I kind of think I know what you're going to say.
Of course not. The only way you can come out of this crisis is for consumption to rise, and the consumption will not rise anymore because wages are still stagnant and banks are not lending any more money. And why should they lend any more money? Their old loans are not being paid back, and people with good collateral are gone. All the good collateral like home equity and purchase of cars on 0% financing, all that collateral has been used up. So banks will not lend any more money. The only way you can keep the system alive is to increase government spending, and I think that there are limits to that. That's why I don't think we can come out of this recession anytime soon, no matter what the government says. And in fact, unemployment will keep rising even if production does rise, and even that will be very difficult to achieve.
Okay, so Obama, when he came into office, he inherited, of course, a lot of the policies initiatives of the Bush administration. But he did have, at that time, working with Geithner and Summers, his hand-picked financial advisors, he could have chosen to, instead of giving all that money to the banks, he could have given all that money to the labor force in some way, which would have been a true stimulus. He made the absolute wrong policy decision. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. He totally made a wrong policy decision. See, the banks are not the credit crisis or the banking problems are not the cause. They are the effect. The cause is the rising gap between wages and productivity. And whenever I offer my theories, whenever I write my theories, I always put forecasts based on those theories so that people can see whether the theory is right or wrong. And I made, I think, 10 different forecasts in this book, The New Golden Age, 10 different forecasts, and including the forecast that oil price would jump and keep rising until 2010 and then collapse in the coming decade. But all those forecasts have come true, so there must be something right about my theories. And the theory is that if the wage gap, if productivity keeps rising and wages don't, then the only way to stabilize the system is to create more and more debt.
So in the case of capitalism, of course, you need capital. Without capital, you can't have capitalism. Capital comes as a result of savings, and savings are generated as a result of workers working and then saving some of that money. So why is it so difficult for Americans to understand that you can't have capitalism without having wages that are sufficient to generate the savings, to generate the capital, to generate a capitalist system? Why are Americans so stupid?
I wouldn't call Americans stupid, but I think the American government is bought out by the wealthy big business interests.
But how come Americans don't lobby for higher wages? How come the unions are portrayed as being communist, quote unquote? How come union leaders are constantly vilified as being somehow anti-American? When without higher wages, there is no capital, there is no capitalism, there is no America. How come the rank and file American worker has been hoodwinked into thinking that their interests are the same as speculators and borrowers on Wall Street? How did that disconnect happen? Is it the drugs that they take? Is it the food that they eat? Is it mass hypnosis? Is Obama a charlatan? How did this happen?
No, see, well, that's why you can see President Obama's popularity rating is coming down. It has fallen so sharply even the first year because the public realizes that what he's doing is not right. And his policies have helped the bankers and Wall Street is reaping record profits. In the middle of the serious recession, they have record profits and bonuses. So the public is very unhappy, but the president's advisors just don't know economics. They have to understand that unless there is a balance between supply and demand, unemployment will keep rising. And the only way to stop this rise is to keep spending more and more from the government side, and that simply cannot go on forever.
Well, the basis for capitalism is that individuals have the ability, unlike, let's say, a communist country, individuals have the ability to save money in their own name and aggregate private wealth. That seems to be one of the hallmarks of capitalism. And yet in America, the average person is saying, we don't want to save money, we don't want capital, we want to work as an indentured servant for a banking class that's being supported by socialists in Washington and on Wall Street. Does America realize that they've become socialist already? They're not, when they argue against these new Obama programs, they're not arguing against socialism, they're actually arguing against capitalism because they are already socialist.
Well, what we have in the United States today is monopoly capitalism, not real capitalism in the way that Adam Smith defined it. And that's what you are talking about. You are talking about capitalism in the sense of Adam Smith, but what we have is monopoly capitalism. And in monopoly capitalism, the big business, the CEO of large companies, they control politicians, and the politicians then pass laws that simply increase the profits of big business. And that's what we have, and that's what we see happening. But the public itself is very unhappy with what's going on. After all, we have 10% unemployment, while record profits are accruing to Wall Street.
But America's had problems with monopolies before. Teddy Roosevelt busted the monopolies and, gave birth to a lot of new companies and more competition, and he got rid of the monopolies in the oil business, etc. So why is this such an alien concept to the average person in America that the economy, as you describe it, is now a monopolist system run by monopolies for the benefit of monopolies? It's nothing new. Why can't Obama just say, look, the economy has become monopolistic as it does from time to time. We need to bust up the monopolies. Why is that such a difficult concept for him to sell to the American people? It's in their interest.
Well, actually, President Obama could have done all this early this year. He could have busted the monopolies in March or April when the stock market was extremely low. But now, by stabilizing the banking system and they gave so much money to Wall Street and because of all that money, in spite of a weak economy, the stock market has come up, has jumped sharply. So if you were to start busting monopolies now, the stock market will go down badly again, and then he would get the blame for it. So I don't think he's in a position to do anything now except wait and see the economy crumble one more time. Then he'll be able to do something. But now he's paralyzed because he wasted away a true opportunity that he had early in March and April.
Okay, well, I don't think he's really in a position to reform the system in any meaningful way. I refer to his policies as a pimpocracy, not a democracy or a monopoly. But, Ravi, you've made some fantastic predictions simply by looking at straight economic work and making some common sense assumptions. You predicted the downfall of communism in your work, and I suggest anyone watching to look you up on the web. We'll put the information on the screen there, and to read some of your essays. They've really been forward-looking and fantastic. You also now predict the same thing for capitalism. How, when, and what will be the trigger?
Well, in fact, this is essentially what we are talking about. As you said, the president is surrounded by people, old guard, and the old guard don't have new ideas. So when you are living in the past and not adjusting your policies to the present and for the future, then there are revolutions in the economy and in the country. So I'm predicting a major revolution would occur in the United States, I think, at the time of the next election in 2012.
Okay, so by revolution, are we talking about an ideological revolution? Are we talking about a revolution in fashion? Or are we talking about pitchforks and torches on the street and manning the barricades in a march to the evildoers in Washington, D.C.?
Well, some of all that.
A little of each. I think that's almost all the time we have. So I want to thank you so much, Dr. Ravi Batra, for being on the show.
Thanks a lot.
And that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Keiser Report. I want to thank my guest, Ravi Batra, and political analyst, Stacy Herbert. If you'd like to send us an email, please do. At this address, it's keiserreport@rttv.ru, keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying, bye, y'all.